Hi, I'm joined today by Tishani Doshi, Indian and Welsh poet and playwright. Welcome to the University of Newcastle.
Thank you.
We wanted to ask you how you started writing.
I guess I began quite early writing little poems and stories in school. I remember one of my first poems was about the house that I grew up in, and that was when I was 8 years old or something. My first published poem.
At 8 years old?
Yeah, in the school magazine. So
fantastic.
I was still very thrilled about it. And then seriously, I suppose, when I was in university, I was studying business administration and communications. And I took a creative writing course, and it was one of those things that diverted the direction of my life, because the minute I started sort of getting involved in this course and reading a lot of contemporary poetry and writing, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Wow.
So it was one of, I would say, 3 decisions in my life where I decided that I was going to become a poet.
Wow, just then and there, in your first creative writing class.
Yeah, I had an amazing teacher, Kathy Smith-Bowers, and she really, I suppose, was in the way that teachers can have that effect of changing the direction of your life. I suppose it has to do with passion and realizing that I had found something that I had an affinity for and that I cared for more than anything else. Definitely more than sort of, say, macroeconomics and
administration.
And not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, it was sort of the thing that touched me, and also that I felt I could devote myself to. But then, you know, it's a difficult decision to make, and a lot of the time since then has also been figuring out, what does it mean to be a poet, and how does one go about it?
Yeah, fantastic. What, if you went back to then, as you are now, what is one thing you would have liked to have known about setting out on the road as a poet? You're also a novelist.
I guess I would have counseled my younger self to sort of ease up a bit. I don't know, in a way, I think that intensity of that particular time of your life and going into those things with such seriousness is charming and necessary. But in a way, I feel I would have told her to laugh more, to embrace a little bit more the ability to make fun of oneself and to find the lightness in situation, rather than going into this, you know, very deep chamber of intensity all the time. But I think, again, it's to do with the phase in your life and where you are then. And I would have said, you know, that it's worth it, and keep going, because it takes a long time to arrive somewhere on that path.
Yeah. How did you, from the moment that you said, okay, I'm going to be a poet, what were your first kind of steps?
My first step was to say I'm going to apply to graduate school.
Okay.
And I went to then Johns Hopkins University.
Okay.
And I did, but I went home for a year and then back to India. And then, you know, I thought that this would give me time to sort of understand a little bit more about this new world that I was going into. And essentially then I left America and I went to London and eventually moved back to India. And that was really the beginning, I suppose, of figuring out what life could be as an artist, and how you would have to change your life in some way in order to bring this into your life. That it couldn't just be a hobby.
Right.
It couldn't just be something that you were dabbling in. That it had to be the very central aspect of everything that you were doing.
Okay. Yep. An absolute commitment.
Yeah, in a way, you know, I learned a lot of that from dance, because I became a dancer a little later in my 20s, and the discipline that is required of showing up to the theater, of kind of going through those rehearsals and sticking with that, was what I was lacking in a way as a writer. So I was a bit dreamy in the sense of, I thought I'll wait for the inspiration, I don't feel in the mood, and not realizing that writing is a job, and that it's a discipline, and that you have to create the situation where you write. And you know, the idea of the muse is a great idea, but it's sometimes you have to shine a torch to a particular, saying, hello, muse, here I am.
Muse!
Come and visit
Come
me.
out!
So yeah, it's about really creating and pushing that and not just being passive about
Yes.
creativity.
Yeah. Can you give us a hint or two about what do you do when you're stuck? I know lots of our students have questions about writer's block.
Yeah.
Do you have any tricks that you put into practice?
My general thing is that I don't try to struggle with writer's block.
Okay.
I embrace it. I think that the two things that I would like to do if I'm not writing is I like to be reading. I feel that reading is always unlocking the creative spirit and writing. So if I'm reading something extraordinary, and if I'm encountering a voice that is extraordinary, that usually makes me want to go back to my work, and it unlocks that thing that has, that wall, that block. And the other thing is physicality. I feel like just going for a walk, going out into the world, just living and taking a break from the desk or wherever you write is useful, because oftentimes just that sort of oxygen and going out into the world and observing something means that it might give you an idea to go back to what you're working on.
Great.
And also it's a little trick that unlocks, you know?
It's almost chemical in a way. You're in some kind of physical state and then you're in another physical state.
But I have many periods when I'm not writing and I'm not distressed by that, because I think that you have to live as well, and sometimes living means not writing, but it never means not reading.
Okay,
so,
that is excellent advice for all of us.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you if you'd be so kind as to read a poem for us, and I'm wondering if you can read us your marvellous poem, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods.
Girls are coming out of the woods, wrapped in cloaks and hoods, carrying iron bars and candles and a multitude of scars collected on acres of premature grass and city buses, in temples and bars. Girls are coming out of the woods with panties tied around their lips, making such a noise it's impossible to hear. Is the world speaking too? Is it really asking, what does it mean to give someone a proper resting? Girls are coming out of the woods, lifting their broken legs high, leaking secrets from unfastened thighs. All the lies whispered by strangers and swimming coaches and uncles, especially uncles who said spreading would be light and easy, who put bullets in their chests and fed their pretty faces to fire, who sucked the mud clean off their ribs and decorated their coffins with briar. Girls are coming out of the woods, clearing the ground to scatter their stories. Even those girls found naked in ditches and wells, those forgotten in neglected attics and buried in riverbeds like sediments from a different century. They've crawled their way out from behind the curtains of childhood, the silver pink weight of their bodies pushing against water, against the sad, feathered tarnish of remembrance. Girls are coming out of the woods the way birds arrive at morning windows, pecking and humming until all you can hear is the smash of their minuscule hearts against glass, the bright desperation of sound, bashing, disappearing. Girls are coming out of the woods. They're coming. They're coming.
Thank you very much. That's a powerful poem. Could you share a little bit about where that comes from and what it means to you?
I wrote the poem in response to an incident that happened in India in December 2012. A woman called Jyoti Singh was raped on a bus, and then subsequently died. And it was something that, I don't know, evoked emotion on such a grand scale in India and around the world, and forced a change in the dialogue around gender violence, around rape, around assault. And it was really a hugely powerful moment, and extremely sad and despairing, I suppose, for myself as a woman living in India and living with this kind of threat of violence always around, and having to encounter it in the newspapers, and also feeling, I suppose, this strange sense of dichotomy, because in India we have a history and tradition of worshipping women. We have a belief in the divine femininity. We have roadside shrines where we worship goddesses. So the place of the feminine is very strong. But I was feeling this kind of disconnect between that idea of worshipping women and the reality of the news. And in a way, as a poet, I wanted to see, well, what do we do about, how do we respond to violence to begin with? And how do we reclaim something? How do we reclaim voice? What about these millions of girls and women who have been silenced? What happens to them? And the poem really came about as a kind of an anthem and a chant, gathering force and building till it comes to kind of haunt you at the end. You know, they're coming and they're coming. And I really, it was one of those poems that, it was about the image of these women being resurrected. And that was the sort of beginning point for me. That sense of, I can't imagine that the end is just that they're disappeared and silenced.
No, they're coming back.
There has to be a way. And honestly, you know, I ask myself a lot, what can poetry do? And I feel that in some small way, a poem is able to reclaim, to transform, and to recreate the world, you know?
Well, I think what you've done here is write a manifesto for girls and women around the world and everyone who supports them. So thank you very much, and thank you for coming to Newcastle.
Thank you so much.